Now as we move on to, the next question, this is, focus around trust. We've talked about this through the podcast, but we've been through many things that we've said. Our external partners have evaluated that and identified it as well. But, a system is only as good as the trust it builds with its users. Can you talk about how you worked with counties, cities, and first responder agencies during those early phases? And how'd you bring them on board? How'd you convince them?
Well, it was really funny. There were some counties that I'd talk to and go through all the pricing, the credits you would get if you had a tower that was, good, and they needed to add additional towers to the system. And honest God, half the time they go, okay, where's the gotcha? What's going to bite us in the butt if we do this? And it's like, it's all here. There's nothing. I mean, it was almost too good for them to believe that that's all they were going to have to do and pay to join this system. And there was actually, from the IT, the technical people in the county said, man, this is a no-brainer. We got to do it. But we're going to have to wait until, a couple of the people move on, retire, or whatever. And that was sad. I just thought that was sad for the taxpayers to continue to use their legacy system, or in one case, put a brand new legacy or a brand new system in not connected to the MPSCS. I didn't understand that at all. But once you got through the mechanics, it was a pretty easy sell, So I think it just took a lot of time. A lot of counties, needed to save up funds, understand it to come on. But I from what I've heard, the majority's on, right?
Yeah, we're down to 5 counties.
5 counties
that are, and of the 5, 2 of them we've had conversations with in the past 60 days. So, I mean, they like others. There's some financial hurdles that they have. Some of it is very much what we've seen through really most of the past 20 years, which is what you just identified. Some
comes our bald eagle.
Believe.
Here's an osprey and a bald eagle's right there. Well, sorry, Brad.
There were counties like Macomb County that were so professional. I mean, it was clean, black and white. And then you had other counties that it was very handshake deal and stuff like that. So
it's, I know you experience, more of it in your role as I was gone for, a few years to go take on some other opportunities in state government. But, I was never far away between the conversation I'd have with you and the conversations I'd have with monthly breakfast with Bob Tarrant. I always not only knew what was happening, but sometimes I was given the opportunity to provide some advice or some direction. And, so I believe, even though that on paper I worked in different areas, but a career standpoint, I was always part of the MPSCS from the entire career. And, I recall some of the, those county meetings that you and I would, drive to. Some of those, it was long days. We would work most of the day, climb in the car to be to a county meeting.
Yeah, no long days.
I'm sure you guys will cover that here shortly. But we would climb in the car and drive to the other side of the state for a county commissioners meeting or a board meeting, and then we turn around and drive back. And then the other, start the next day, the same way. And, many of it was as simple as what you identified, is they were believing some way that this couldn't be truthful, that
too good to be true.
Way. Exactly. And I think that's the part is I continue to look back, and I know both of you as well as others that have been part of the system over the past 30 years, is it truly has been a successful system. We've taken the taxpayer dollars and spent them wisely at the state and local level to ensure that in lieu of duplicity, we have a single system that's providing interoperable communications from the furthest tip of the Keweenaw Peninsula up in Copper Harbor to the southern tip of any of our southern border with Indiana and Ohio. And I know, Theron, you had, a big hand in one site in particular that, some of our listeners probably aren't aware of, but we actually have a site in Ohio, don't we?
Yeah, we do.
And sometimes that pains me to say that we have one there. It'd be better to have one in Indiana.
Someone's got to take care of them.
But that was part of the partnerships that were identified early on, is where we needed coverage. There was a greater value in lieu of building something. We reached out to the state of Ohio. It was really, Theron, I know you were integral in all of that. And the relationship you had with Daryl Anderson in those early days that really facilitated that. And, since then, I've had a great relationship with Daryl Anderson in Ohio. He's long since retired, but I still talk to him on a regular basis. And same is true with, Dave Smith, who was the former director in Indiana on their statewide radio system. As what was said earlier, we led everybody else, but around us followed suit fairly quickly. I think others may have wished that they were ahead of us, but we're still national champions.
Well, we've kind of jumped ahead, and or I guess I want to jump back a little bit, because when Bob and I went out and put that stake in to say, okay, this is where the tower is going to be, this is where the shelter, and we had some cookie cutter designs, but we had to go and look at the property that the buyers identified, that the engineers said we need a tower in this area, and we'd go and put that center of stake tower out there. So you and I, for a long time, and maybe it's still that way, we're the only ones that ever been to every one of our tower sites. But it was funny because, we saw more animals. You remember the animals we saw?
Oh, my God, yeah.
We're up near Mayo, and I'm telling Bob, all right, turn right at this corner, and we get out here, and I said, well, we're going to see elk. And he goes, why is that? And I go, it's right there on the map. There's an elk right here on the map.
A big paper map.
Yeah, big paper. And we parked, and we walked over the hill, and I'll be damned, there wasn't a herd of elk there.
Really?
Isn't that crazy?
Big
That
bull
is
bugling, and had 4 or 5 cow with them, and I was like, holy cow, mark this site down.
Yeah, and there's other stories that just was so fun and
Badger.
so
The
badger.
story, right?
Yeah, we're driving down a gravel road,
Logging road. It was a logging road.
and there's dirt like being thrown almost all the way across it. It's like, what the heck's going on? We pull up there, and here's a hole, and dirt's just flying out of it. And all of a sudden, this badger comes out of the hole. It's kind of like roll my window up a little bit more. Yeah. But bear and obviously deer and I don't know I don't remember we saw a moose.
Yeah, I don't think we ever saw it. But what I do distinctly remember, I think you remember this one, is at site 1702, when we were siting that tower. It's kind of in a rolling hill. That was going to be a guide tower, so it's kind of a big piece of property. We come up over the hill, and I see this pterodactyl-looking thing coming at me. And I've never seen a sandhill crane in my life.
Yeah.
And this thing is coming at me squawking. I had no idea what this thing was. And little did we know that, it had babies with it. Thought we were going to attack their babies. But I've never seen a pterodactyl in my life. I thought I was back in Jurassic.
You still haven't.
Jurassic Park. No, I did see one that day.
Well, great point. You both had an integral role in determining the placement of every MPSCS site. As you just shared the animals that you saw, but can you walk us through the process that you took, from the time, I know you just didn't randomly go out and look at property. What was the process like, from the time that it started to your guys' role at every site where you identify the center point where the tower would be?
Well, and chime in anytime, Bob. There was a lot of work done before Bob and I got there. Motorola engineers would say, okay, we need a tower. I believe it was a 5-mile area radius to get the proper coverage they needed. And then buyers, Mary Levine's group, would go out and find a piece or several pieces of property. And then you and I would go out and say, okay, this might work, but let's look at the other one that's available. Oh, yeah, this is a lot smoother. And, sometimes we had to buy 40 acres to get the tower to where it needed to be. So we always tried to keep the drive as short as possible, but that wasn't always the case. But it was trying to decide whether it was going to be a self-supporting tower or a guide tower, depending on how, a guide tower takes like 17 acres of land to put that sucker up. So in some cases they were self-supporting towers, which was more money, but we were always trying to be money conscious, obviously. And we'd put that center of stake in there, and then Bob's the engineering team would take over and design it and stuff like that. And so that was pretty straightforward. It's just someone had to go out there and put eyeballs on it.
Yeah, I think if I remember right, there was probably an average of 8 to 10 sites we'd have to look at for every site there was. So they had all these alternate sites because they knew there's no way we're going to get every site we looked at. So as we, especially in the lower half of the state, there was more options, if you will, on sites. The further we got north, the easier. I say easier. It was a bit easier to procure the property because there's more of it. But yeah, that was the process. Pretty much what Theron described is we had to work with, again, going back to the teamwork discussion with the Dave Doty's and Mary Levine's and our engineering team and Theron and I. But I don't know. We did more in case you don't remember this part, but we actually laid out the towers too. After phase one, or maybe it's the middle of phase one.
Like where the guy wires.
Yeah, because then we got a digital theodolite survey set up, and we'd actually set it up, find true north, magnetic north, and start laying the tower sites out. So then when the surveyors got there, life was a lot easier for them. And it was how we wanted to make sure the orientation of the guy wires were, for the road and on those types of things. So, yeah, it was quite the process. But as Theron said, we got it down to some cookie cutter stuff after a while to help make it a little bit easier for us.
Yep. So, regarding some of those sites, I would say I haven't been to all the sites. I've been to a lot of the sites. And there's one of them in particular, I'm curious how you guys found this site. And, was there not a better site? I think it's Black River.
Is that the one with all the switchbacks on it?
Oh, yes.
No, there was not.
Yeah, for those that aren't familiar with the Black River site, it is, it's a short potential road from the main road to the tower site, but it's a long road because you've got to go back and forth. And when you get to the top, it's an abrupt stop because the propane tank is right at the top. But I think that was one of the first ones that I was in that area of the state, and I think that was one of the rare times I saw the amount of turkeys I did. I thought it was a Black River coming across the road, and it was actually just probably thousands of turkeys. But
no, I remember that site. We go back to the options again, and we were stuck. That we didn't have many options. I think that was the only option we had for the coverage, and I kept pushing back on the cost and the road, and holy cow, it was an engineering feat to put that together, and the geogrid and stuff we had to put in to keep the road in place. But we had to go back to give and takes. It was what we were dealt with, and you can build just about anything anywhere. It's just gonna matter how much you want to pay for it.
Right.
So that was one of those where I think we collectively said we have to do it.
Right.
And we did.
No doubt. There's the top of that is very tall, hill.
Imagine getting the building up there.
Oh, yeah. Well, I think I was there not long after that.
The two dozers coming up.
Yes. But it was, for me, it was definitely, an experience seeing that. All the others were pretty flat drives in, as you identified, short roads. So that was that part of the state where I started to get out there and see, okay, these are definitely different up here. And speaking of different, I know you guys had some opportunities in the UP. Any memories of sighting towers in the Porcupine Mountains and the challenges that was?
Yeah, there's one up on a ski lift, or you take ski lift up there if you want to. You could drive, but the view. I mean, we talked about the eagle flying back. I've been up on that site and seen the eagle and looking at Lake Superior. I mean, it's a beautiful beautiful site. Definitely, if I remember right, is that the one you climbed
I was just gonna
in the fall?
I was just gonna bring that one up.
The color was awesome.
It was,
and usually it was Greg Burbage and me that would climb the tower, inspect it, and we get up there over the treetops and we go, "You guys got to come up here." So they put their gear on.
I'm like, I'm in. Let's go.
Yeah.
I was waiting for an invite.
Yeah.
I was told by our Motorola safety folks, never go climb a tower. Well, guess what? I climbed a tower.
But you had your safety gear on.
I absolutely was 100% tie off.
Through all of that, I know you guys spent a lot of time together, in a vehicle. Do any stories stand out from that time? A moment when you realize that this is really clicking on all cylinders, or if you would, an example, this is really starting every time I turn the key.
I'd say from my perspective, when it really started kicking into gear was when we, at the end of phase 1, I guess, as it started coming together, we realized we're going to make this. We realized we're going to do this. We realized what we had put together is repeatable and we can keep doing it. And I think that's when I realized that things are clicking. And we just kept on keeping on. I mean, we had a system, we had a process, and we moved. We would start at before daylight, and we would come home after daylight. And many times they're 16-hour plus days because we, again, wanted to get this thing done.
Right, and I think what you're referring to is not necessarily siting the tower, but the final inspection at the sites, right? After the site's all in there and inspecting the tower, inspecting the grounding. I mean, I don't know, there was 30-some alarms that went back to the NCC. We checked every one of those, high temp on the generator, low oil, temperature sensor in the shelter, security. There was a lot of checks that went on to make sure that site was ready to go when it got turned on. So
that's exactly what I meant. And I guess maybe for the audience to understand that not only did we site every tower, we saw the construction of every site, and then we inspected every site. And that's a lot. When you talk about miles driven and all that kind of stuff, I mean, I know, Theron, you were asking this, but there it is, right? I mean, we put over 1.5 million miles in support of this construction effort from the beginning to end, and on and on and on it goes. All these site development statistics, it's actually unbelievable. And I know you guys have been putting a little of these out on social media.
Good. Maybe we can get a copy of this in the podcast at the end or something like that. There's some impressive statistics, some numbers there. What you won't see there is it's a fun story. We can edit it if we have to, but we're in phase 2, and we were in Grand Haven. We had hotel reserved, and we get in there, and we have these 2 guys from South Carolina, Greg Burbage and David Goff, our quality assurance people. So there's 4 of us, and we pull into town, and I said, well, you guys, you ever seen the Grand Haven Pier? Nope, never seen that. I said, well, it's on the way to a hotel, kind of, a mile or 2 out of the way. I said, well, before it gets dark, let's go look at this. So we go there, and there's huge waves coming in, and someone had a bright idea. Well, let's walk out on the pier. And I'm going, yeah, I'm game. So we get out there, and all of a sudden, a rogue wave comes in, and it's like there's an overhead metal structure, and we're all grabbing this thing, and we get wet between the knees and the waist down. And so then we go to the hotel, and we're all wet and everything like that, and get our hotel, and we said, hey, where's a good place to go have dinner? And she goes, well, there's not too many places. We got a power outage. Heck, we didn't even know there was a power outage. And she goes, yeah, I mean, downtown's got power, but a lot of the area around doesn't have power. So she says, so go to this bar restaurant. And we went there. They have good hamburgers, fish, stuff like that. And this is where I knew this guy had my back. Because we're sitting at this booth, and this guy comes over, and he's got to be 6'10". I mean, huge 350-pound guy, huge guy. And his name's Tiny. He said his name was Tiny. And he goes, I'll bet you $20 I can blow a square smoke ring. And we're kind of like, we're not interested, Mr. Tiny. And the locals are all looking at us, and it's like, something's going on here. I mean, they know this guy. They know what's going on. And we push back. No, not interested. So next thing I know, he takes a drag off his cigarette, and he blows a square smoke ring. He goes, that's $20. And he wasn't going to leave until we paid him $20. And we're going, hey, we're not playing. He wouldn't give up. Next thing I know, Bob's getting up, gets in his face and looks up at him and says, Tiny, go sit down. And I'm taking my glasses off. Greg's rolling his sleeves up. And Tiny says, okay. So I'm going, I was so impressed. This guy, he's, a foot taller than Bob and 150 pounds heavier, and Bob wasn't going to take any crap off him. So I still remember that. Was
Old Tiny.
Fun story.
Well, that's the epitome of trust right there, and the value of, that relationship and partnership. All right, as we've talked a lot about the history of the MPSCS, covered a lot of the time, what many may not recall is that was within the first few years of the system. It was before what we know today, what created this whole shift in interoperable communications. For a lot of years, agencies were on their own systems, and much as, Theron, as you identified earlier, some of the challenges that you had and the team had as they were talking to local agencies, around adoption of the MPSCS in lieu of continuing to invest in a legacy system or buying a new system. But as both you gentlemen can, think through this around that turning point, not only for the MPSCS, but honestly, it was a turning point for the nation. That one moment in American history that truly underscored the critical need for interoperable communications was September 11th of 2001. If there was ever a time that has been identified that public safety needs to be able to communicate with one another at all times, that event truly put it in the visible eye of the people, of the citizens. Public safety may have known that for some period of time, but now it was brought into the perspective of the elected officials, the people, the citizens. On that day, we saw communication systems fail under pressure. Essentially communication systems disappeared in that same day around the epicenter of that event. Fire departments couldn't talk to police, and some of that predated the event. It was just the way that business worked. Fire departments only talked to fire departments. Law enforcement only talked to law enforcement. It was command officers that talked to one or another. But local agencies couldn't connect with federal responders or state responders, and no doubt lives were lost because in some cases help couldn't be coordinated in time, and many of those lives were first responders where they were not able to hear the calls for help or the vacate need based on the events. Well, what impact did that tragedy have on the MPSCS, and how did you shape or reinforce your missions as you went forward following that event?
Well, I don't know if a lot changed going forward from my involvement. I know MSP took and had cars posted at our, big zone controller sites. We had pretty good security. I mean, the shelters were alarmed and everything. But I think we certainly learned the importance of having hardened sites. The buildings were designed to be 30-06 proof, bulletproof. And we might have decided that was the time to buy a couple extra mobile generators in case we lost power. But I think for me it was still business as normal, and which was good. That's what the system was designed for. So I don't know if I can help you out on that a whole lot, too.
Bob?
I certainly can. That was towards the end of this project, and it was, I would have said it was right in the beginning of 2002 or something that I was asked to come out to our New York office and talk to some people about the communication system and what interoperability meant. At this point, now I understood all those things. Not knowing any of it, and 7 years later, I understood it quite well. But going to the site of 9/11 was one of the most sobering things I've ever seen in my life. And then, as you get out and then talk to all these state officials and chiefs of police and stuff all over the place, you can intertwine the messaging of what interoperability really means and why you want to have hardened sites, why you want to have resiliency, why you want to have redundancy, why you want to have all those things. So all of that stuff starting here, as I said before, after I left here, I did 15 years around the country talking to people about those things. And that was really the precipice of kicking those things off and talking about those things. So, it was sobering on one hand. On the other hand, it helped tell the message and the story of what interoperability really means amongst things like your system, where you've got 2,600 agencies. It's amazing. So I think that's what the impact was for me.
Yeah, I think if I recall from the metrics that we have from back then, I think around that time frame there were 152 agencies on the system. And around that number, I had to double check, but from that time to where we're at today with over 2,600 agencies, I would agree with you there. And then the mission never changed for the MPSCS. If anything, it heightened the opportunity to.
It justified it.
Exactly. And I believe around the same time frame, it may have been within a year around or after that, I believe it was Senator Alan Cropsey that at that time, the system was still part of the state police, and directed the state police to allow all public safety agencies to leverage the MPSCS, not just state police. And that direction from the legislature at that time has continued to be our direction. Unfortunately, I believe that the legislature was not aware that those efforts were already underway. When Jeff Steffel was in place and subsequently when Tom Miller was in place, that was a lot of the dialogue that was had to build in the extra capabilities of the towers to sustain that. But I think that became the catalyst between the event of 9/11 and then subsequently, the direction from, again, the senator was the voice, but the legislature really, put the effort behind that for the state police through the MPSCS to go out and market the system. And I say market, really make it available. And you're looking back over the 30 years, there was some slow years of growth. I know when I had the opportunity to be the acting director many, many years ago, City of Detroit was the first subsystem that we added to the system. The irony that I came back as the director, knowing that I already knew everything about the City of Detroit and the subsystem that was in place there, but that started the entire shift in that of us adding subsystems, simulcast systems to the system, and really changed then, in-building coverage capabilities and rest. So, even though, what we may not have had as this monumental shift, because it was already our direction to build a statewide system to provide interoperable communications. But I think there may have been some events that were catalysts for us that made the discussions a little bit easier, both from, with our first responders, our local, as well as our federal partners. I believe not long after that is when we really started seeing federal adoption on the system across many of the agencies, not just the law enforcement agencies, but also I believe the national parks also saw that as a means to provide capabilities that didn't exist. So it became more of a dialogue than I think a shift for us, because it again, very much like the MPSCS, no one was watching. We're with any public safety communication system, it's the Wizard of Oz. It's behind the scenes. Now the 9/11 event and all the activities that happened there, it put it right in the forefront of the citizens who understood that.
Yeah. I do want to say something there. We kept talking about Steffel earlier, but I want to say something about Tom Miller, because when Jeff came in, like I said, you needed the bull in the china shop to get us to where we needed to be to get this system on the air. But also that perception of Jeff with locals was tough. And I think they saw the state that way. But when Tom Miller came in, I say it this way, maybe a more polished politician, if you will, to get out in front of people and let them know that this is what our mission is. And I think Tom did a tremendous job when he came in and started doing what you're talking about, rolling it out to the rest of the locals and the feds and everybody else. So he did a tremendous job there from my vantage point.
Yeah, I completely agree. Working, directly for Tom in those days, he was faced with a challenge that Jeff was faced with as well, but I think more of a challenge. Support within MSP was difficult because, one thing that Jeff was able to do, as you shared earlier in the podcast, was reach across into the legislative process and have those conversations. And I think with Tom, he was not given some of the same capabilities, as well as, there was, some changes within the state police that brought an entire arm of technology into, our office that he had responsibilities for. So it was no longer just directed towards the continued development and completion of the project and growth of the system. He was now managing these other parts. And, I would completely agree that the two gentlemen were completely different, but needed for the right time to deliver.
Right time and right reason.
Yeah, absolutely.
And I'd say, both individuals today, they're both contacts that I've reached out to ask questions, both from a mentoring standpoint, so from a history standpoint. I have talked to Tom probably more than I've talked to Jeff, only because it took a little while till I was able to connect with Jeff. But once I tracked him down in a flapjack restaurant, then I was able to then reconnect. But what both gentlemen continue to have is passion around the systems. I've talked to both of them. The pride that they have and what the system has continued to be able to do when they were a part of that. It's great to see. And, some of it is they both had, great careers, and to see that they both, hang the MPSCS as monumental components of their career is still really positive to see.